You're listening to the weekly Parsha podcast, recorded with Hashem's never-ending assistance in Ramah B'Shemesh Israel, 5775-2015. This week's Parsha is Parsha's Terumah. In the Parsha this week we have Hashem's command to the Jewish people. God asks them to bring donations, to start constructing, putting together the pieces, and ultimately construct the Mishkan, the tabernacle, which would be the pinnacle, the point of connection between the Jewish people and God, the place where the Jewish people would serve God in the way that God would prescribe. There's a medrash here in Parsha Lamed Gimel, Parsha 33, letter Ches, number 8. It says like this: V'yichchu li Terumah. The Torah tells us that the Jewish people are to bring a donation to the temple. V'yichchu li Terumah. So the Mefarish here explains that this medrash is understanding that when the Torah says "V'yichchu li Terumah," shall bring for me a Terumah, the word li doesn't only mean for me; it can also mean mishali, for my things. Hashem is saying to the Jewish people, "I want you to bring something of mine, which you believe or it looks like it's yours, but I want you to bring it as a donation for the temple, for the tabernacle." Amar Rabbanan, the sages say as follows: Af bamon. When it came to the manna, this amazing, miraculous food that Hashem gave to the Jewish people for 40 years when they were in the wilderness. So alongside the man, as the manna would fall from the heavens for the Jewish people, alongside it, there would be precious stones. And those indeed who merited to have these precious stones alongside their manna were the great ones, the tzaddikim, the righteous individuals. So they would collect them and they would hide them away. Teida shekenu. You should know, says the Medrash, that this is so. Shenemar, as the verse says, V'hem heviu elav oid nedava baboiker baboiker. In referring to the generosity of the Jewish people when it came to their Terumah, when it came to their donation to the tabernacle, it says that they brought another donation in the morning. Now, what does this mean? What they were only bringing in the morning, but not in the afternoon? It's referring to something that has to do with the morning. They were bringing donations that they had received themselves in the morning, alongside the manna which fell in the morning. It's a reference to the fact that they received in the morning these precious gems, these precious jewels that they brought as a donation to the tabernacle. So it's very interesting. It comes out that the Jewish people, when they brought these donations, they were actually bringing back, so to speak, that which belonged to God, that which God had given them as a gift. They recognized, that tzaddikim, the righteous individuals, recognized that the gifts that Hashem had given them were indeed to be brought back and returned, so to speak, donated back to the temple, to the tabernacle, which represented their relationship with Hashem. And it's very interesting, and there's another piece in this medrash that also needs explanation, but we need to understand why would it be that Hashem would give them a gift that's only for them to return, so to speak, to Hashem as a donation to the tabernacle. Now let's look further in this medrash, because there's another very interesting idea, teaching, that this medrash brings us. V'zeis Terumah. The Torah tells us this is the donation that they brought. Amar Reb Tavyumi. Reb Tavyumi says, when it was time for Jacob to pass on from the world, so many years ago, so many years before the Exodus. So, Kar Levanov, he called his sons together, Amalahem, and he said to them, Hey, you you should know Shakadosh Baruch Hu asid laimar livnechem lasis mishkan. That God is going, in the future, He's going to tell your great-great-grandchildren to make a tabernacle. Ela you kol tzarachem muchanim biyadchem. But I want you all to have ready in your hands, so that your great-grandchildren will also have ready in their hands all of the materials that will be needed. Shenamar, we see this in the verse in Genesis in chapter 48, verse 21. V'haya elikim imachem. God will be with you. Why is he saying God will be with you? What is the reference? V'chital al datcha. Could you think Kishaya Yaakov Avinu chai lehoya HaKadosh Baruch Hu im banav? Hashem wasn't with them? What he's saying, Hashem is only going to be with you in the future? What's the reference? Elakach amar lehem. This is what Yaakov was referring to. Jacob was referring to this concept that we said. Asiru lomer lachem va'asuli mikdash. In the future, Hashem is going to be with you. This is a reference to the fact that Hashem is going to ask you to do something, to create a tabernacle so that He will be with you. And as a result of creating that tabernacle, Hashem is going to bring down His divine presence and He's going to dwell amongst you. Shenemar, as the verse says, you shall make for me a tabernacle, a dwelling place, and I will dwell amongst you. Yeshmeam says the Medrash is very interesting. There were those who prepared themselves. They held on to those items that Jacob had instructed his children to hold on to prepare. And there were those who forgot about it. When Moses came and the Jewish people were instructed to make this tabernacle, there were those who no longer had the items that were handed down from generation to generation, so they had to bring their own things. But there were others who maintained that tradition, that which was given over from Jacob to his sons, and they still had those items from way back when, from many generations previous. And they were able to bring those items finally at the command of Moshe. Shekenu Aimer. This is what we find that it says in the verse, Kol ish asher nimtza itay tcheles v'argaman. There were those who brought these different colored dyed wool, blue, purples, from that which they had in their hands. What does it mean, from that which they had in their hands? It refers to the fact that there was gopher wood that they had with them. What does it mean that they had with them? So it's a reference to those items which they had with them, which had been passed down from generation to generation, that had been prepared by the Avos, by the Shvatim, by the original tribes, the fathers of the tribes, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, etc., which had been instructed by Yaakov, by Jacob himself. Now this Medrash is remarkable. It's really interesting. And the question is, why is it necessary, why was it necessary that Yaakov Avinu instruct his children to prepare these items for a future time so many hundreds of years later? Why was it necessary? Why was it something that he thought of, that he was inspired by, that Hashem gave him that vision to be able to see what was going to happen in the future? Why was it necessary for that preparation to be made so many years in advance, so many hundreds of years before? And what is the message for us? Now, looking at it, it seems clear to me that these two different things, these two different statements in the Medrash are interconnected. One statement is the one we just said, that Yaakov even instructed his children to prepare these items that are going to be used in the Mishkan more than 200 years later. But the other statement of the Medrash, I think, is a parallel statement, is a parallel idea. And that is that Hashem gave the Jewish people, gave the righteous people, these avonim, or argolios tovis, these precious stones, alongside the manna. He gave it to them for what reason? They would hide them, they would put them away, they would store them, and then some time later, when Moses requested donations, these righteous individuals had that which to donate. I think this is a parallel. It's like there's something that's being given previously, that's being given at an earlier time, that's being stored away, that's being left for a later time, and at that time, when the moment is right, Hashem instructs the Jewish people to bring out the item that they had previously stored to be used now in the construction of the Mishkan, in the construction of this tabernacle, in their relationship with Hashem. Now, in thinking about this idea, I was reminded of a question, an interaction that I had with a friend who, we talk about spiritual things, we talk about our relationship with God, with Hashem. And one of the conversations that we've had has to do with the concept of savings, with putting money aside. Money, Hashem gives me money. He gives me the money I need to pay for my groceries, to pay for my mashkanta, my mortgage, all the different expenses that come along in my life. God provides me with my needs. But what about savings? What about putting money aside? Is that something which is in line with hashkafa, with the Torah's hashkafa? Is that something which is in line with spiritual values? Or does a person say, look, Hashem provides for me now. Hashem always provides for me. Why do I need to put away money now for a later time? Why is that necessary? And during this discussion, I was reminded, I had this discussion this week, I was reminded of what we spoke about last week with the day borrowing from the night borrowing from the day, the stars borrowing from the moon borrowing from the stars. That there are times when Hashem gives a person something. A person, Hashem gives me money right now. Sometimes He gives me more money than I need. Sometimes He gives me less money than I need. There are times, I work, my work personally is in music, so there are times when there's no music happening during the Omer, during the 3 weeks. And so, what do I do then? I need to have money set aside from before if I want to be able to pay my bills. Or I need to find other work in another tchum, in another area. But the idea is that sometimes I borrow, so to speak, from myself. Sometimes Hashem gives me more now so that I can have what I need later. And in saving and putting money aside, there's a recognition of the fact that Hashem takes care of me. It doesn't always work exactly the way I think it's going to work. I would like to think that Hashem takes care of me every moment. Of course, it's true. But sometimes Hashem gives me now something that I need later. And the concept of putting away money, let's say, into savings, there is room for that in the Torah. There's room for that in a spiritual practice, because it's a recognition of this idea that Hashem gives me something now for later. And as I was learning this medrash, as I was reading this, I couldn't help but see that it seems to be the very idea that this medrash is teaching. The same idea of borrowing, the day borrowing from the night borrowing from the day. Sometimes the way Hashem works the cycles of reality is that sometimes Hashem gives something now for later. Sometimes Hashem gives an inspiration to a Yaakov Avinu, to a Jacob, and says to him, at a later date, 200 years from now, I'm going to ask my children, your great-grandchildren, to enter into a relationship with me, to build a tabernacle so that I can enter into their homes, so that I can dwell amongst them. But I want you to start preparing now. I want you to put aside those items that they're going to need. And it was the same thing with the manna. The mun fell, and alongside the mun fell these very precious stones. And the tzaddikim put them away. They put them away. What does it mean they put them away? They recognize that they didn't need them now. But obviously, if Hashem is giving them to them, they obviously will need them at some point in the future. So what does the righteous person do with it? The tzaddik puts it away. He hides it. He stores it away. And then at the future moment when it becomes clear that those items, Hashem wants them back, so to speak, so they pull them out. And they say, here they are. Here are these items. I will now donate them to the Mishkan, to my relationship with Hashem. Now, think about the power of this amazing measures, this amazing idea. I mean, can you imagine if you were one of the great-great-grandchildren in the time of the wilderness, where Hashem instructs the Jewish people to now bring out all of those items that they had stored away all the way from the time of Yaakov Avinu. Jacob had told his children had set aside these items, and those children gave them to their children, to their children, to their children. They held on to these items. They stored them away throughout their time in Egypt. They come into the wilderness, and now Hashem says, bring out those items that you've been storing for 200 years. And now is the time to activate those items, to bring them into your relationship with Hashem. And you bring that item out. This is the Yerusha. This is the inheritance that you have all the way from Jacob, from the Shvatim, from your forefathers. It's an old item. It's been handed down from the generation through the generations, from one generation to another. And you finally bring out this thing. It was a legend. It was a legendary item in your family, and you bring it out, and you donated it to the Mishkan. Wow, isn't that incredible? It's powerful. It's so powerful. But what's even deeper to me in thinking about it is look, Hashem instructed Yaakov Avinu. God said to Jacob, God gave him this inspiration, put aside these items now, because you are going to need them. Your great-grandchildren are going to need them in the future, in their relationship with me. When that tzaddik brings out that precious stone, He put it aside. He hid it. He knew that Hashem is giving this to him for a reason. And now it becomes clear. It wasn't just happenstance that alongside the manna came these precious stones. No. It was because Hashem wanted him to have something to give back. How powerful, how beautiful. It's as I bring out that item which Hashem gave me so many generations ago, or a while ago, alongside the manna, as I bring out that item, there's a recognition that Hashem gives me what I need. Hashem constantly continues to give me what I need. Right now, I'm bringing out that item, and I recognize that Hashem gave me then what I need for now. And here it's even more beautiful. It's not just about savings. Yeah, if I put aside money and I recognize that Hashem gave me this money for some later moment, it's beautiful when I bring it out. But in this medrash is even more beautiful because it's like Hashem gave me these things, these items, and I held them in my family for generations so that one day I would be able to donate them and feel like here's something I'm giving of mine. Here's something that I'm giving to Hashem, so to speak. I'm giving it back. I'm part of this relationship. Hashem wants me to be involved in this relationship, and here is this item which Hashem gave me so many years ago, so many hundreds of years ago, so that I can be able to have this item and give it back to God, give it back into my relationship with Hashem, and be able to build a tabernacle, a place, a space for my relationship with Hashem. There's a really famous concept that our Chazal, our sages teach us, and I've shared this before, that when a child is inside of its mother's womb, Chazal, our sages tell us, the Gemara Nida, that when the child is inside of the womb, it learns the entire Torah. And as the child is about to come out of the womb, that malach, that angel, that spiritual being who taught him the entire Torah, causes him to forget, taps him on the lip, causes him to forget all the Torah that he learned. Child comes out, doesn't know anything, but he spends his life relearning, so to speak, that Torah that he learned, those spiritual teachings that he learned inside of the womb. And as he learns those items, as he learns those spiritual teachings, they're not new. They ring. They ring as true because it's still inside of him. He's forgotten it, but he learned it once. And so he brings it out and he learns it and he reconnects to that which he had before. And I was thinking how this measures, this statement of our Chazal, this Gemara, is really exactly the same statement of this medrash that we spoke about with Yaakov Avinu, with Jacob giving his sons the instruction to put aside these items, and the Margolios Tovos, these precious stones that the tzaddikim, the righteous, set aside as well, that they receive with their mon. Here's this child, this human being being born into the world. Before he comes into the world, he receives those items which he's going to use to build his mishkan, to build his personal tabernacle, where he's going to bring the Shekhinah, he's going to bring the divine presence into his life. He receives those words of Torah. He receives those spiritual teachings. He forgets them. They're still there, though, in the background. They're still inside of his heart, such that when he learns them again, he's not learning them for the first time. They're ringing with truth. But again, like we said, this child, this person, this human being, now as he learns these spiritual teachings, he is bringing back that which he received so many years ago. He's bringing that back and he's offering it back to God. And he's using it as a vehicle to build that relationship with Hashem. It's so beautiful. It's so powerful. And it very much parallels what we spoke about last week, as we said, that there's a borrowing that occurs. That child in the womb, that child borrows the Torah. He doesn't really earn it. He hasn't really worked for it. He borrows the spiritual teachings, forgets them. He gives them back, so to speak. He forgets it. But then he gets it back. And there's this continuing cycle, this continuing movement, receiving, giving back, receiving, giving back. And there's a recognition that what I have is not mine. Hashem gives me my soul, as we spoke about last week. Hashem gives me my body. At some point, I need to return that soul to my Creator. At some point, I need to return that body back to the ground from which it came. But what is the teaching? Why do I have to go through this process? And the answer is that by going through the process, I become a partner in the relationship. When I bring these items, when the tzaddik, when the righteous individual brings back the gems that Hashem gave him alongside his manna, what's he really giving to God? He's not really giving anything to God. It wasn't even his. It rained down from the heavens. Or when that person brings these ancient heirlooms that he's given, that were passed down from generation to generation, what's he really giving to God? It's not even his thing. It's something that was passed down from before. Or there's another medrash that describes the Torah as a mayrasha. It's an inheritance. It's something which, like when a father passes away and he gives his child an inheritance. What did the child do to earn that inheritance? Didn't do anything. It's not his. But the answer is that that's not true. That by putting it away, by putting it aside, by hiding it, by placing it, by taking that precious gem and recognizing that what I have, he doesn't just throw it away and say, oh, what do I need this for? He doesn't just give it to someone else. He stores it away. He recognizes by holding on to it that this is something which is part of his avodas Hashem, part of his service of God. By maintaining, giving over that item from generation to generation, that heirloom, there was a recognition that this is mine. And this is something that I need to hold on to, that I'm going to give back to God at some point in my service of Hashem. When I live in this world and I go through my life and I recognize that the soul that God gave me, the body that God gave me, were given to me so that I can serve God, so that I can go through the process of giving back to God. I can protect my soul. I can keep it in such a way that it doesn't get tainted. It doesn't get tarnished. By going through that, even as I give it back after 120 years, so to speak, even as I return my soul to my Creator, even as I give back my body to the ground from which it came, there's a recognition that by using it properly, I was involved. Hashem wants me to be a partner in my own creation. Hashem wants me to be a partner in the creation of this Mishkan, of this tabernacle, where I serve Hashem, where I create that relationship. They shall create a tabernacle, I will dwell in their midst, God says. Hashem wants us to be part of this relationship, part of this. Hashem wants us to activate, create the vehicle, to create the vessel where He's going to be part of our lives. And it starts with a recognition that all that Hashem gives me is to be used for my service of God. Hashem sometimes will give me more. Hashem will sometimes give me less. And sometimes I need to take that extra that Hashem has given me and I need to recognize that it's going to be needed for later. At some point, it's going to be needed for my service of Hashem. And sometimes Hashem places into my life something from generations back, which I'm going to need now. And everything is part of Hashem's plan, and everything is for me to utilize in my relationship with Hashem so that I can be part of that relationship and activate and create a vehicle, create a vessel for Hashem to come into my life. Hashem should bless us. Hashem should bless you. Please bless me. Hashem should bless me. And all of us, Hashem should help us to be able to recognize all the places, all the things that He gives us, all the items that are meant to be used in our avodas Hashem, in our service of God. And we should be zeich, we should merit to be a true vehicle, a true vessel for God to come into our lives. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbos. This podcast was made possible through the gracious donations of listeners like you. For more podcasts like this, please visit www.arigoldwag.com or search on iTunes Ari Goldwag.